Good morning and welcome to the new edition of my live comments. Yesterday, President Trump addressed the United Nations. I will not address that address or the speech of Trump, but I am more interested in one fact that seems to have escaped most of the commentators, none of the media in print or in TV or in radio covered it. And that was the recognition by Trump of a fact that the concept of globalization, as far as sovereignty is concerned, is failed, and that the concept of the nation states is valid, and the sovereignty of the nation states is inviolate. No amount of agreements between the political leaders can override the sovereign rights of a nation to behave the way it likes, subject to the normal conditions of human beings, not to wage a war, not to humiliate others. Although we know that the strong do not need bother about the limitations imposed by the natures of law. There have been instances all the time of their violating it. But the concept of a nation state and the confirmation and reaffirmation by President Trump is an indication that the nation states have come to stay, and no amount of criticism is going to challenge that. And the evolvement of nation state is a cultural, a sociological, and a historical matter. There was a time when there were no nation states. I don't want to go back into the history when the men were living in the caves and they did not need a state. But when the human beings settled down, when they gravitated to one location, then there was need to establish law and order. And the concept of nation, or concept of a country came into being. Earlier it was a country which might be composed of a village. Then came the Greek concept of the city-state, that each state, each city is a state by itself. Slowly expanded to a larger geographical image, like the states of India. And like in England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, England. In France, it was Gascony, it was Luxembourg, it was Marseille. So it was the different principalities which assumed sovereignty. And then the common cultural ethos running in that city-states and in those principalities made them more cohesive, and nation-states came into being. For some time, and even it continues even today, played a very major role both in uniting the nation-states and in dividing them. There were theocratic states where no other religion was permitted and people had to leave that place and establish new places like USA, Australia, Canada. Here people came out of the religious persecution, as a matter of fact, and people might have forgotten the history, but that's a fact. Mayflower, the first immigrants to USA, were the Protestants who had been hounded out of England. And then slowly and slowly other people came. So the nation state was ultimately a territory where the people had a common allegiance to that nation, to that country, and it became so much ingrained in them that they went to the limits of jingoism and saying, my country, right or wrong. This again had its negative impact because it breeds often intolerance, but that came to stay. Slowly, in some parts of the world, the religious fervor that ties people, that unites people, slowly and slowly decreased, and the multicultural, multi-religious societies, secular societies came into being. And that strengthened those nations because their love for the country overrode their love for the religion or the culture. And thereby came the establishment of these nation states. Now, sometime back, in 80s, as a matter of fact, at the end of the 80s or the beginning of the 90s, people came up with the idea of globalization. Originally, it was that there should be free trade for all, that people should be able to buy and sell goods without imposition of the customs and other things. Perfect market should be there. And it was basically to enable multinationals have a free sway all over the world, and some multinationals became so important and so powerful that they changed the very political color of the host country where they wanted to penetrate, like it happened in Chile, where PepsiCo engineered a coup and killed the president, Allende, though it was done at the behest of CIA. In India, we remember East India Company came as a trader and became the ruler. Slowly the rule passed to the British Crown. So trade, the flag followed the trade, and many times the nation states became subservient. But the concept of the nation states never died. And that concept was a combination of religion, combination of culture, similar rights, similar dressing, the mode of dress, similar language, and similar attitude towards life. There were some discordant things. But coming back to the concept of globalization, the globalization started, and here came a very paradoxical situation. Till the concept of globalization came, the sovereignty of the nations was always unquestioned. Austin's theory of sovereignty was very clearly where a fixed territory, a number of the people obeying a certain code of conduct, the laws, and not in the habit of being subservient to another part, that nation was sovereign. Now, the establishment of League of Nations, of the United Nations, put some curbs on that freedom and the sovereignty, but by and large, they remained sovereign. They could walk away from the agreements, they could keep them distant from the things, but then when globalization came into being, the concept of sovereignty was clipped. Actually, it was clipped after the Second World War, when UNO came into being. And when, under the umbrella of UNO, a UN force was created to wage war in Korea, where they had no purpose and no sense in being there. So a peacekeeping force became a militant force. Then again, the same thing happened in the first Gulf War. The same thing happened in the second Gulf War. The same thing happened in Spain. Not only the military groups like NATO and CETO and CENTO and Warsaw Pact, but also the United Nations directly established forces to fight. Peacekeeping was another thing, like they went to Gaza, they went to Congo to keep peace. Fine, that can be accepted, and that did not hurt the sovereignty of the people. For example, United Nations group for peacekeeping went to Kashmir, but neither the sovereignty of Pakistan nor that of India was hurt. However, when the peacekeeping forces were converted into warring forces and the cover of UNO was given to them, that clearly aimed at spoiling the sovereignty of the people. Take up Iraq. Saddam was a leader. He was the president, and according to the constitution, he was a valid law. But he was displaced and hanged. Same happened in Libya. So the UNO, in fact, under the suzerainty, wanted to exercise its power as a supra-sovereign, a suzerain to whom everybody should pay allegiance. People were discontented at places, but some powers which had imperialistic designs were happy because they could dictate those countries under the threat of UN. So the limiting factor came into being that the so-called sovereign states were really not so sovereign. The International Court of Justice did not impinge the sovereignty, but this creation of the United Nations Army to fight wars did impinge, because it was the whole world against you. And USA unashamedly took advantage of this and imposed this will on the millions of the people and hundreds of the countries which did not accept its understanding. Now, when Trump comes up and says the nation state and says that we are sovereign and for me, America first, then he accepts that as America first is with me, for me, it is your country first for you. So each country has a right to protect its sovereignty. This has given an impetus that every country can protect itself except until and unless it has hegemonistic designs on others. It has also dealt a death blow to globalization in politics, not in trade. Trade you can continue, this can be bilateral, this can be multilateral, whatever. But the political hegemony that was limiting the sovereignty of the nation state has been dealt a death blow. And that, I think, is a very positive sign. When nation states came into being, they came into being especially to express that the national ethos comprising religion, comprising culture, comprising traditions, and a common attitude to the life were preserved from nefarious interaction. And each nation state had a right to have its own way of life and its own way of living without an imposition from the outsiders. You see, freedom is the essence of the growth. And when there is an attempt to circumscribe that freedom, when there is an effort to limit that freedom, whatever the cover may be, whatever the guise may be, it is extremely harmful to creativity, to progress, because a chained mind can never evolve further. So Trump's speech yesterday was like a breath of fresh air. I might not agree with some of the things, but I am a firm believer that nation states are a panacea. Each nation looks after the best interest of its people, and when it looks after the best interest of the people, it knows with whom to deal, with whom to trade, with whom to interact. There was a time when the sanctions are imposed. Okay, you impose the sanctions if you don't mind it. But you cannot engineer coup. You cannot engineer toppling of the legitimized government. And again, you are nobody to decide whether this legitimate or not. It's for the people of that nation state to decide. The best example of upholding the national security and sovereignty and the nation state sovereignty was when China and India signed the much talked about Panchsheel Agreement, which said non-interference in the internal affairs of the others. And that is what it is. Now imagine, we as human beings say, this is my space, don't invade my space. This is my privacy, don't invade my privacy. But as a nation, we permit, often, against our wishes, we don't wish it, against our wishes to others to dictate to us. Let's assume for the sake of argument that there's a country which says or prohibits human rights in saying that women are not allowed to drive. It's for the women of that country to rise up, and not for a Johnny sitting in Washington or in Ottawa or in 10 Downing Street to decide that those people should be punished for saying that the women cannot drive. I object they should be permitted to drive. I fully support that. But I have no reason to interfere. Education? Yes. Persuasion? Yes. But use of force? Definitely no. What happened in Iraq? What happened in Syria? What happened in Libya? What happened in Afghanistan, whether it was Russia or USA, is absolutely unacceptable until and unless. Now, there's another caveat. If that nation state asks for the help, then of course, you can go over there. But if there's been no help asked for by the legitimate government, I'm not saying help asked for by a group of people. A terrorist might claim, okay, come and help me, and you go over there. No. So, given these fine nuances, the best hope for humanity is strengthening the institution of nation state. A garden looks beautiful when there are multicolored gardens. We talk of the multicultural countries. Why don't we talk of the multinational states rather than talk of globalization? Globalization has been a curse as far as the political part is concerned, and even economically it's not a good thing. So, let's say hail to the nation states and hail to the freedom of the countries. Let each country rise, bloom, and progress, and live the way that country wants without any outside restriction. Once again, let each nation state manage its affairs without any outside interference. Thank you.